So it's important to understand what language is made of. Basically the building blocks of language. So we'll start with phonemes. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound that actually affects the meaning of speech. So changing a phoneme basically can change the meaning of a spoken word, like changing the letter in a printed word often changes its meanings. So for example, T, T-E-A, is not the same as C, S-E-A. Although changing the phoneme affects the meaning, the phonemes themselves aren't meaningful. So just the letter T by itself isn't particularly meaningful, nor the letter S by itself is not particularly meaningful. But changing that letter in the word is meaningful. Related to that is the notion of morphemes. Morphemes are a way of combining phonemes to yield higher levels of organization. So it's the smallest unit of language that has meaning. So the phoneme itself is the smallest unit of sound that affects the meaning, whereas the morpheme is the smallest unit of language that actually has meaning. For example, dog and run are morphemes, but so are prefixes, such as un, because that can change the meaning of a word, and suffixes such as ed, even though they can't stand alone. So words are basically made up of one or more morphemes. The next is syntax. Words are combined to form phrases and sentences according to rules, grammatical rules that we'll call syntax. According to English syntax, a subject and a verb have to be combined in order to form a sentence. Adjectives usually appear before the nouns that they modify, and so on. So even if you use English phonemes combined in proper ways to form morphemes, and you string those together according to the laws of English, you still might not end up with an acceptable sentence. So consider the sentence, rapid bouquets deter sudden neighbors. It sounds right. Syntactically, it is right, but it's also nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. So in order for something to make sense, not only should it have syntax, but it probably ought to have, well, it should have semantics. Semantics is the real link between language and thought. So a really great linguist named Noam Chomsky really led a revolution in the study of language. He basically focused on why you couldn't explain certain things like a sentence like, "This is my old friend," has more than one meaning. It could be, "This is my friend that I've had for a very long time," or "This is my friend who happens to be old." It's the same sentence, but it has two different meanings. So you couldn't account for similarly couldn't account for similar meaning in different sentences, like "Don't give up just because things look bad," and "It ain't over till it's over." So those are two ways of saying exactly the same thing. So here's one situation, and saying the same thing has two meanings. And then there's a way in which saying two different things has the same meaning. So that's pretty strange, right? And that's what Chomsky focused on. So he suggested that behind these strings of words, what he called the surface structures, is more of a deep structure, an abstract representation of the relationships among those words and among meaning expressed in the sentence. So for example, surface structure, the shooting of the psychologist was terrible, represents one of two things. Either the psychologist had a terrible aim, right? Or it was terrible that someone shot the psychologist. Those are two different meanings and the same set of words. So analyzing the deep and surface structure encouraged psychologists to analyze nonverbal behavior and rules, etc., as well as sort of mental representations. So those are the building blocks of language: phonemes, morphemes, syntax, and semantics.